Hi, my name is Michelle Darian, and I'm a registered dietitian at InsideTracker. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Gil Blander, founder and chief scientific officer at InsideTracker. Gil is uniquely interested in the science of aging and empowering people to live healthier, longer lives. Gil, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me for this interview, Michelle.
So Gil recently attended the 9th Aging Research and Drug Discovery Conference in Copenhagen in early September. So in this video, Gil is going to talk to us about some key points from the conference, what he learned, what was surprising, and where the emerging research is headed. So let's get started. So one of the big topics or big takeaways that seemed to be kind of prevalent at the conference this year was epigenetic clocks. So epigenetic clocks are biochemical tests that are used to measure biological age. Gil, can you describe what epigenetic clocks are, what they're actually calculating, and then how they measure aging?
Yeah, so epigenetic clocks are clocks that based on the changing in the epigenome, the material that is above the genome. So part of those modification can be methylation, acetylation, and other, but the clocks are focused on methylation. So there is a sequence that's called CPG islands, that those islands are methylated, and the amount of methylation is changed, and it's also was considered to regulate transcription of genes. So around a decade ago, a scientist at UC LA, his name is Steve Horvath, developed what we call the epigenetic clock, or what we called Horvath clock. And basically, he tried to find a correlation between the age of a person and the methylation of a specific loci in the genome. And he developed the first generation of clocks that actually called the Horvath clock. Now they are the second generation and third generation. And the first generation were mainly based on correlation between the age of the person and the methylation. So they try to find what is the best correlation. What is interesting about those clocks is that the R, or the correlation between the epigenetic age and the chronological age is very, very strong. It's maybe the strongest that everyone found. But the question is, what does it mean? And why there is a correlation between the epigenetic clock and the age of the person? And it is still a mystery, and it's very hard to understand. And I came to the conference with a hope that I will understand it better. And actually, I came back to tell the truth a bit more confused. And I will explain to you why. So first, Steve Horvath gave a presentation, a very interesting presentation. And actually, he have seen that there are even a pan-methylation clock, meaning that you can use the same location for different kind of creatures, human, mice, dogs, horses, and so on, and you still can get a very nice a correlation between the age, meaning that this change in methylation is conserved in the evolution. But at the end of his presentation, one scientist asked him, what is the effect of methylation at specific site on the expression of the genes? And again, just to a background for a non-scientific listener that listened to us, the dogma was that if you methylate a specific location that is located on a gene, that should influence the expression of the gene, and then influence the amount of protein that will be produced by this gene. And what Steve said, that actually it's not clear with the epigenetic clock or the specific location, and maybe the regulation is a bit more complex, meaning that it's not regulated a specific gene, but more like maybe it's regulated an enhancer, so something that regulate a group of genes, or maybe it's something more about the chromatin structure. So it's still not really clear. What does it mean? What is those methylation of the CPG island mean to the function of a cell, the function of organ, or function of a creature? And that's raised some concern, at least for me, what does it mean? Why should we use those clocks? So that's one point. Another point that I heard when I discussed it with some other scientists that use clocks is that actually epigenetic clock might resemble more differentiation of the specific organ or specific creature than real aging. And the reason for that is that you can actually reverse the clock using infecting those cells or organs or creature with what we call Yamanaka factors. Those are 4 or 3 genes or protein that allow us to bring almost any cell into a stem cell condition. And when you do that, you can see that actually the epigenetic clock immediately go back. And you can also see that there is a strong correlation between the epigenetic clock and the amount of differentiation of specific organ or specific creature. So maybe the epigenetic clock are more resemble of the differentiation of this tissue than really the aging process. The last point that is still puzzling for me is that here at InsideTracker, we are really interested on something that you can regulate. So it's not enough to come and say, hey, Mr. Joe, you are 45 and your epigenetic clock is 50 or 40, but also give you some recommendation. What can you do in order to bring you back to become younger and give you a specific, most preferred by us are a lifestyle recommendation, including nutrition, supplement, exercise, and lifestyle changes. And today, the data about that and the effect on epigenetic clock intervention that bring it back is very limited, and it's also very, very small. So all of that data made me a bit less excited about those epigenetic clocks. I think that they are still very exciting, but I think that they are still not ready for a consumer to use and try to understand how old they are. And hopefully in the future, we'll learn more and understand more, and we'll be able to use them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like what the result you would get from an epigenetic age test might not be as modifiable as something like the blood that you had mentioned, which I think is super interesting. Do you think, are there any specific types of clocks that you think are, or updates to existing clocks that you see coming in the future?
Yeah, so in this conference, there have been a lot of focus on clocks, and there are development in every direction of clock. So you have even a clock that take a picture of your face, and based on that can estimate your age. Or some that are a bit more sophisticated, or let's say more molecular biology related. So a clock that look at the proteomics of the protein that you produce, and based on that can give you the age. Or transcriptomic, so clock that looking at the transcription of a genes or the mRNA level, and based on that giving you the age. And there is a lot of development there. They are also more connected to the endpoint, because at the endpoint is the protein. So the proteomics give you very close to the protein, or transcriptomic is one step away from the protein, because you move from DNA to RNA to protein, so it's much closer. So I think that those two clocks are pretty interesting. Again, it will be hard to implement it for end consumer, because both transcriptomic and proteomics is not easy and not cheap to do. But again, I think that the most exciting and the clock that actually we are using at InsideTracker are a blood-based clock, or a blood biomarker clock. And they are really connected to what's happening in your body. And it's very easy to come and say, hey, your glucose is high, so you should consume more fiber. Or you have a low iron, so eat more, or take iron supplementation. So those are the clocks that today are much easier to modify and understand. But hopefully in the future, we'll have more and more clocks that will give us more variety of options for our end consumers.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think something I'm used to hearing as a dietitian is someone coming to us and saying, okay, so now what? So I have this number, I find out this about the way I'm aging. So then what can I do about it? So it's great that there's an option on the market where someone can kind of see how they're aging and then also, like you said, do something about it. So that makes sense. All right. And it sounds like another major theme from the conference was also women's health. And then in research, especially in clinical drug research, we know that that typically includes biological male subjects, and sometimes that lacks biologically female subjects. So how has that specifically impacted what we know about women's health?
Yeah, so unfortunately, in the history of science, a female or woman have been neglected. And the reason for that women are much more complex than males. So it's much harder to standardize them. And it's easier to do an experiment on male because there is a better chance to succeed in the experiment. So in history, the majority of the experiment was done on a male animal or on male humans. And because of that, there are a lot of problems that we are facing today. And actually today, the funding agency, including the NIH, is trying to force researchers and also pharmaceutical companies to use more and more women in or females in the clinical trials. But still you can see that only a very small portion of the NIH funding is going toward female reproductive studies, which is bad, but that's the situation. And as I said before, because the majority of the clinical trials are done on males, the majority of the side effects that found after the drug have been approved are found in women's because nobody tested it. So it's not a surprise that suddenly you will see a side effect. So that's a very a sad fact that I think that we need to somehow approach and correct, because it's if you have a new drug, the hard truth is that if a woman will try to use it, most likely she has a much a higher chance to have a side effect than a male that will try to use it.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and I think because biologically women are so different than men, that it's important to be able to try to test these things on both genders. So definitely very interesting. So another thing, so we know that menstruating females eventually reach a menopausal age. Is menopausal age indicative of any other health outcomes? For example, does it affect health span or the aging process?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say that I learned a few facts that I never knew about women and menopausal, which was fascinating for me. One fact that was very interesting is actually we human are actually unusual. And most female animal doesn't have menopause. It's very unique to human. I think dolphin also have it, but most of the animal kingdom doesn't have the menopause phenomenon, which is interesting.
Oh, wow.
Another point about menopause is that it's interesting to know that there is a strong positive correlation between the age of the menopause and the longevity of the specific person. So that means that if the menopause occurs for a specific woman later in life, she have a better chance to live longer than someone that the menopause started earlier. And I think that there is a lot of I think that a lot of sense in that, because women are in a way protected premenopausal, and there is an evolutionary reason for that, to allow the women to grow the offspring of the woman. And after that, there is much less reason to protect her. And it sounds like there is a strong correlation that, again, I didn't know about that. And the last point that I wanted to say is that actually the ovaries are actually age much faster than most of other organs. So it's an organ that age faster, and it's interesting to know that even faster than the other organ in the bodies.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. I'd be curious to see when further research comes out if there's any hypotheses of why that might be. But yeah, that's really interesting. Again, it's another reason that we should study more women in research. So one of the next major themes was the idea of having longevity clinics. So it's been said that in the current healthcare system, and especially in the United States, provides sick care rather than healthcare. It seems like one of the themes of the conference also was the inclusion of longevity clinics, which, just based on the name, appears to take a more proactive or preventative approach to health. So I'm wondering if you want to describe a bit about what longevity clinics are. Are there certain parts of the world that tend to have more longevity clinics, and who are these longevity clinics currently serving?
Yeah, so that's again another fascinating subject that I haven't been aware of, but there is a strong push for a longevity clinic. So it's basically a real physician, real practicing physician that not only treat the sick, but also treat the healthy, and trying to allow them to live longer, better. There is actually also during the conference, there was an announcement that a group of physicians and scientists started a society that called Health and Longevity Society. And this society is led by Andrea Meyer, which is a physician and a scientist in Singapore. And it's an interesting society that if you are a physician or a scientist or someone that's interested in longevity, I think that it might be interesting for you to join. So if we are talking about the longevity clinics, there are longevity clinics today around the world. So it's not only in one place. I heard about some in Asia and in Europe, and I think that also in the United States, they're starting to come. And the idea there is that the physician is trying to help let's say, the client or the patient, whatever you want to call him or her, to optimize their life and actually focus more on prevention. So those physicians, for example, are using clocks and trying to see and compare how old your body from the inside comparing to how old your body based on your driving license. They are trying to look, and some of them giving you some drugs that have been shown, at least in model organism, to extend lifespan, but they are not yet approved for a primary indication of longevity. And again, because aging is not a disease today, so it's very hard to have an indication for aging, but a lot of scientists are trying to push for that. And for whoever is viewing or listening to our podcast, Longevity by Design, scientists such as Nir Barzilai and David Sinclair and others are really trying to make aging as a disease. And then when it will be a disease, then you can start using some drug to treat the disease. Today, it doesn't consider to be a disease. So I think that to summarize, the longevity clinics are around us. Those clinics are not only for the elderly. Those clinics can everyone that want to live better, longer, and want to do that, I will recommend him or her to do that. They are trying to help us to do that, and it's like saving for your retirement. So if you start earlier, you have a better chance to get to that point better, because aging starting very early. So at your 20s, you're starting to decline, unfortunately. And if you start earlier, you have a better chance to maintain yourself in a better way than if you start at your 80s.
That's awesome. I think it's really cool to see the kind of that system shifting towards more of a preventative approach to your health and taking action early. So that's really cool that's kind of where it's shifting. All right. So another main topic would be the GLP-1 drugs. So a class of drugs that has gained recent attention is GLP-1 agonists. So what is GLP-1, and what do GLP-1 agonist drugs specifically target?
Yeah, so that was a really exciting presentation by a scientist from Denmark that actually discovered the GLP-1 and was part of the development of this, let's say, drug from inception to clinics. And I think that it's a really wonder drug. So when I've seen this presentation, I actually immediately contact my father-in-law, which is a type 2 diabetic, and I told him, you have to go and talk with your physician right now and try to convince him or her to subscribe it to you, because this drug can actually help diabetics to become healthier or healthy, so take them out of the diabetic situation. And the GLP-1 is actually a hormone that inhibit the glucagon secretion, and basically it's help to limit the post-meal glucose extraction, and it's actually at the end it's regulate the appetite and food intake. So it's a very simple in concept, but very complex in real life. So the pharmaceutical company from Denmark actually develop it and develop some modification that make it more stable. So today you might only need to take an injection once a week or once a month, and they showed a very strong data about the effect on the diabetic population, but also a very strong data about metabolic related diseases, and specifically about weight loss. So the GLP-1 drug have been shown in a very good clinical trial and very well-controlled one to decrease the weight of normal people, not a diabetic patient, by an average of 15%, which is, if you think about it, it's getting closer to the effect of bariatric surgery. And again, to anyone that listening to Longevity by Design, we had an episode recently with Mitch Roslin, that is one of the best bariatric surgeons, and he discussed a lot about bariatric surgery. So bariatric surgery, on average, make a weight loss between 20 to 30%. So using the GLP-1 is almost as good as bariatric surgery, and bariatric surgery have some side effect because you cut your gut, so you have later on some side effect of a problem of absorption of some nutrient, vitamin D and iron are a few of them, and the GLP-1 agonists are still a new field, so we don't know what are the side effects. But I think that it's much less invasive to receive an injection once in a while than have an operation that remove a piece of your body. So I think that that's a very, very exciting development that maybe can transform the obesity epidemic that we have, which can be amazing.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and it's interesting that it makes sense that it can target diabetes and then also weight loss as well, just from the mechanism that you described. I'm just curious. So, a popular drug on the market for diabetes, we know is metformin, and metformin has recently had attention for its potential impact on aging. So, I'm just curious, how did they mention anything about how GLP-1 would relate to metformin, or it's probably two different mechanisms, but is there one that's maybe superior over the other, or could GLP-1 also potentially be beneficial for longevity?
So yeah, definitely during the presentation, it showed some data that I think that it's unpublished data that show that treatment with GLP-1 increased longevity.
Oh, wow.
In diabetic and non-diabetic patient or subject. The crosstalk between metformin and GLP-1, I'm not sure that it was discussed, and I haven't researched it. But as much as I know, the mechanism are different. So they might give you an augmented effect. But again, I don't know, so I cannot say what is the interaction between GLP-1 and metformin.
Very interesting. All right. So something that always comes up when talking about kind of longevity and health span are the hallmarks of aging. So can you briefly describe what the hallmarks of aging are referring to?
Yeah, so around a decade ago, a group of scientists decided to build the hallmark of aging, basically everything that happened during the aging process. And they done it based on the earlier publication about the hallmark of cancer. So they said, hey, aging is as important of cancer. Let's build a hallmark for that. And then they said, okay, let's what happened in aging? So there is more inflammation, senescence cells, telomere shortening, and so on and so forth. And basically, there are around 10 different hallmarks of aging. And based on that, they are looking at what are the small molecules or the genes that actually affect those hallmarks of aging, and try to find maybe a key molecule that maybe work on all of them. So that's a nice tool to, first, it's a nice way to come with an agreement inside the aging research community, because as I assume that you know, and if you don't know, scientists always disagree. So let's try to find a way for the scientists in the aging research field to agree on something. And then when we agree on something, then let's try to find how can we attack and solve those issues. So I think that it's an interesting concept that and more scientists are agree on that, and they are reshaping and fixing a bit the hallmark of aging. But the bottom line is, let's come with an agreement. What are the major causes of aging, and then let's try based on that to come and see how can we attack them and solve it and allow us to live better longer.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and it's really cool. It's interesting to categorize those and how they relate to aging, and how that actually has so many similarities to cancer. So, I mean, but it totally makes sense. So you mentioned cellular senescence as being one of the hallmarks of aging. Are there any specific scientific ways to target cellular senescence?
Yeah, so another subfield of the aging research called senolytics. So that's an agent that actually can attack specifically senescent cells. If we want to go a bit deeper into senescent cells, so senescent cells are cells that actually stop replication, and they are sitting there, and they are basically taking space or real estate of the body. And also some research show that they are also extracting some molecules that can influence cells around them. For aging, there is some data that show that those senescent cells can actually cause aging or inhibit the activity of some other cells, such as immune cells and other. For cancer, is actually the effect is, at least the dogma is the opposite, that senescent cells are a reason for why we don't get cancer, because when cells are have too much DNA damage or too many aberration in the genome, there is a process that pause the replication of those cells using some cell cycle checkpoint proteins such as P21, P53, and other, that basically pause the replication of the cells, and by that prevent cancer. So I think that the aging research community are looking more about the negative effect of cellular senescence on longevity, but we need to remember that senescent cells also have a positive effect on cancer. And it's interesting to see and to observe what is happening, because there is a lot of excitement today about cellular senescence and longevity, and how can we eliminate those senescent cells, but I'm saying we need to keep an eye on, okay, what does it mean for cancer? Because we want to live forever, but we don't want to die from cancer. So it's basically, we need to find a balance for that.
Wow, yeah, that's super interesting. I didn't realize that there was so much nuance in that relationship between cellular senescence, aging, and then aging-related diseases. So that's super interesting. And I feel like we don't often hear that other side of the story.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so moving on to some of the companies that were sponsoring the event. So it sounds like there was nearly 30 companies that sponsored the longevity conference. Is it possible to give us an overview of the specific companies that are in that longevity space? Like what type of companies were represented there?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, as you said, there've been like 30 sponsors of this conference, which is I was really excited to see that, and some of them are dealing with senescent cells or cellonetics. Some other are looking at some of clocks. So there are a few companies that are dealing with clocks. Some other that are really trying to develop drugs against or for longevity. And some other that are also interesting companies that are more in the management consulting, such as BCG, Boston Consulting Group, that started to look into this domain. And when Boston Consulting Group are starting to look at the domain, that's mean that this domain started to be more mature. So that was very interesting and exciting to see the presentation of a serious partner for Boston Consulting Group that talking about how can you take a drug and develop it for longevity from A to Z, which was very interesting for me to see. So basically, it's a mix of companies that looking at clocks, to companies that are developing a drug, to companies that looking at a specific aspect of the hallmark of aging, to companies that thinking about going into the aging research and coming to learn. That was the mix of the companies there.
I think that's super interesting, and it's really cool to see companies approaching longevity and health span from all these different lenses. And I think that's one way that all these different companies and different industries can work together and kind of reach that common goal. So I think it's super interesting that there was kind of a breadth of types of companies there. Let's see. So are there any specific topics that you would predict that you'd hear more about next year based on anything that you think is emerging that you learned about?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So that definitely the clocks will continue to find more and more clocks for different organs. So we haven't discussed that, but now based on a blood test or a proteomics, you can come and find what is the age of your liver versus your heart and see what is the issue, the big issue that you need to pay attention to. So I think that that's something that can be interesting to look at. I think that looking at other effect of longevities, and also hopefully some of the companies that have started to do clinical trials to see how it's going to them. How are they getting into from preclinical to phase 1 and from phase 1 to phase 2 and so on. So I think that trying to see whether those companies are making progress, it will be interesting. I have to say that all of those companies, because aging is not a disease, they are going into indication that are aging-related diseases. So inflammation and diabetes and other, because they cannot come and say the aging is not an indication that they can use. And also it's very hard to do that because humans are living very long. So the clinical trial might be too long. Yeah, so I think that there is a lot of excitement and progress in this domain. Another very interesting point that actually announcement that happened during the conference is the announcement of a very big organization that came with a big amount of funding for aging research. So that's an organization a foundation by the Saudi Arabian that are dedicating $1 billion a year for aging research, both for academia and later on also for startups and companies. And they recruited a very successful and a well-known scientist to manage this organization. But I think that this amount of funding can help a lot for the basic research, but also for definitely for starting new companies and expanding companies. So I think that that's also a very nice development that was announced during the conference.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of money, and that can fund a lot of, it sounds like that can fund a lot of different projects amongst different industries.
Yeah,
yeah, that
absolutely.
Okay, so to close it up, what is one thing that people can start doing today that can help them improve their lifespan and health span?
One thing, okay, it's hard for me to say because there are a lot of things that you can do. And it's also depend on your age and maybe gender and what you do today. So it's hard for me to say, but what I can say that if you look at the effect of a specific intervention, and again, if I'm looking at from the angle of InsideTracker, so we're looking at nutrition and exercise and supplement and lifestyle changes. I think that looking at the scientific literature, the stronger effect on, let's say, on longevity or health is exercise. So if you can exercise or modify your exercise, if you are exercising, it can give you the biggest value for your investment. And again, it's hard to me to say what kind of exercise and when. It's depends if you are an elderly or let's say older adult. It's very important for you to have more like a strength training because the majority of the reason or high amount of older people are dying because of a fall and they are breaking a bone, and then it's very hard for them to rebuild it. So if you exercise and you build your balance and you build your muscle, there is a better chance that if you fall, it will be, the effect will be less critical. For younger person that do nothing, obviously you should do something, either strength or endurance, and all in the between. So there are a lot of different things that you can do, but if you are not exercising, start to exercise. If you are exercising, maybe try to modify it to find the right balance for you. And InsideTracker is giving you a lot of different recommendation and intervention related to that. So if you are an InsideTracker user, look at your InsideTracker account and it can give you the information. If you are not, we have a lot of, we have an amazing blog that Michelle, you are part of the people that writing those blogs, and there is a lot of wealth of information there that people can read and try to fit the best intervention for the person, because I'm a strong believer in personalization. So it's very hard to give like a cookie cutter solution. There is no cookie cutter solution.
Right. I think that's such an important point too. It's just that's going to look different for everybody, but I love that the tip itself is movement and exercise, even though that could look different depending on the person and their unique needs. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge that you learned at the presentation in Copenhagen. And it was really great to hear all about that and all the things to look forward to in the field.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.